My name is Bruce Harrison, and I've been practicing law in Chicago for 23 years. I've handled everything from corporate mergers to criminal defense, but nothing could have prepared me for the case that would define my life: the systematic destruction of my own marriage and career. It started on a rainy Tuesday in March. I was reviewing case files in my downtown office when my assistant, Margaret, knocked on my door with a puzzled expression. "Mr. Harrison, I've been looking at your recent cases, and there's something strange going on," she said, placing a stack of files on my mahogany desk. I looked up from my computer screen, adjusting my reading glasses. "What kind of strange?" "You've lost 7 cases in a row, all decided by Judge William Crawford." "That's unprecedented for you." She was right. In my career, I had maintained an 87% success rate. Losing 7 consecutive cases wasn't just unusual, it was statistically impossible given the strength of the cases I'd been handling. "Pull Crawford's recent decisions for other attorneys," I instructed. "Let's see if there's a pattern." What we discovered over the next few days was disturbing. Crawford's decisions showed clear bias against my cases specifically. Other attorneys with weaker arguments were winning, while my ironclad cases were being dismissed on technicalities or receiving unfavorable rulings despite overwhelming evidence. The first case that should have been a slam dunk involved a slip-and-fall incident at a grocery store. We had security footage, witness testimonies, and medical records. The defendant's insurance company was ready to settle for $300,000. But Crawford ruled that the plaintiff was primarily at fault, reducing the settlement to a mere $15,000. His reasoning defied legal precedent and common sense. The second case was even more baffling. I represented a small business owner whose competitor had clearly violated a non-compete agreement. We had emails, contracts, and financial records proving deliberate poaching of clients. Any reasonable judge would have granted the injunction immediately. Crawford not only denied it but ordered my client to pay the defendant's legal fees, claiming I had brought a frivolous lawsuit. By the 4th consecutive loss, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. But I couldn't figure out what I had done to earn Crawford's enmity. We had no history of conflict, no personal disputes. If anything, our previous interactions had been professional and cordial. The answer, as it turned out, was much closer to home than I ever imagined. My wife Victoria worked as a project coordinator for the city planning department. We'd been married for 15 years, and I thought we had built a solid life together. Our suburban home in Lincoln Park was paid off, we had healthy retirement accounts, and we had planned to start a family once my practice stabilized. The first hint that something was amiss came 3 months ago. Victoria, who had always been punctual and routine-oriented, began working late several nights a week. When I asked about the sudden increase in overtime, she explained that the city was implementing a new digital record system that required extensive evening training sessions. "It's tedious," she would say, coming home at 9 or 10 p.m. with an exhausted expression. "But the overtime pay is too good to pass up. We can use the money for our European vacation next year." I accepted her explanation without question. Victoria had always been ambitious and financially prudent. If the city was offering overtime, it made sense that she would take advantage of it. But then I noticed other changes. Victoria, who had never been particularly interested in fashion, began buying expensive clothes. She started going to a high-end salon for her hair, spending $200 every 2 weeks on highlights and styling. Her phone, which used to sit openly on the kitchen counter during dinner, now remained constantly in her purse or pocket. The most telling change was in her behavior toward me. The woman who used to greet me with enthusiasm when I came home from work now seemed distracted, almost guilty. Our conversations became superficial, limited to logistics about household chores and weekend plans. Our intimate life, once passionate and frequent, dwindled to almost nothing. "I'm just exhausted from all this overtime," she would explain when I tried to initiate physical contact. "Once this project is finished, things will get back to normal." But the project never seemed to finish. The training sessions stretched from weeks to months, and Victoria's behavior became increasingly secretive. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening in late April. Victoria had left for another training session, and I decided to surprise her by bringing dinner to the city building. I stopped at her favorite Thai restaurant and picked up pad Thai and spring rolls, planning to wait in her office until she finished her meeting. But when I arrived at the municipal building at 8 p.m., the security guard informed me that the building had been closed to non-essential personnel since 6 p.m. "Are you sure?" I asked. "My wife Victoria Harrison works here. She's in a training session that runs until 9. The guard, an elderly man with kind eyes, shook his head. "Sir, I've been working this desk for 12 years. There are no training sessions happening tonight. The building's been quiet since everyone left at closing time." I stood in the lobby holding containers of rapidly cooling Thai food, trying to process this information. Victoria had lied to me. The question was, where was she really spending those evenings? Over the next 2 weeks, I began paying closer attention to Victoria's schedule. I started noting the days she claimed to work late and cross-referencing them with the building's actual hours. The pattern was consistent. Every time she claimed to have a training session, the building was either closed or hosting only routine maintenance. I wrestled with the decision to follow her. It felt like a violation of trust, an admission that our marriage was fundamentally broken. But the combination of my mysteriously failing cases and Victoria's increasingly obvious deceptions created a perfect storm of suspicion. On a Friday evening in early May, I told Victoria I would be working late on a brief. Instead, I parked across the street from her building and waited. She emerged at exactly 5:15 p.m. as she always did on her late days. But instead of heading home, she drove to the Fairmont Hotel in the downtown district. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. She parked in the hotel's garage and took the elevator to the lobby. Through the large windows, I watched her approach the bar area, where a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit was waiting. Even from a distance, I recognized him immediately. Judge William Crawford, the man who had been systematically destroying my legal cases for the past 4 months. They embraced like lovers meeting after a long separation. Victoria's face lit up with a joy I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Crawford's hand rested possessively on the small of her back as he guided her to a corner booth where they could have privacy. I sat in my car in the hotel parking garage, watching through the lobby windows as my wife shared an intimate dinner with the judge who was ruining my career. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with brutal clarity. This wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy designed to destroy my professional and personal life simultaneously. But why? What could Crawford gain from sabotaging my cases? And why would Victoria participate in such an elaborate scheme? I needed answers and I needed evidence. Over the next month, I hired a private investigator named Marcus Chin, a former FBI agent who specialized in surveillance and digital forensics. His reputation for discretion and thoroughness made him worth every penny of his substantial fee. "I need to know everything," I told Marcus during our initial meeting in his downtown office. "How long this has been going on, what they're planning, and most importantly, whether there's a financial motive behind the sabotage of my cases." Marcus was a small, precise man with intelligent eyes and an economy of movement that suggested military training. "Marital infidelity cases are straightforward," he said, making notes on a legal pad. "But if there's judicial corruption involved, this becomes much more complex. Are you prepared for what we might find? I need to know the truth regardless of how painful it might be." The investigation took 6 weeks, and the results exceeded my worst fears. Crawford and Victoria had been meeting twice a week for 8 months, every Tuesday and Friday evening. They always used the same hotel room, always paid in cash and always arrived separately. But the affair itself was only part of the story. Marcus had obtained access to Victoria's email and text messages through methods I preferred not to know about. The communications between her and Crawford revealed a plot that was both more personal and more criminal than I had imagined. "When you file for divorce," Crawford had written in one text message, "I'll make sure the case comes to my court. I have connections with several divorce attorneys who will work with us to ensure you get maximum alimony and property division. Your husband's recent losing streak will work in our favor. We can argue that his earning potential has significantly diminished." Victoria's response was chilling in its calculation. "How much do you think we can get? He has about $800,000 in retirement accounts, plus the house is worth at least $650,000. If we can get half of everything plus ongoing alimony, we could have enough to start fresh somewhere." But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. Crawford hadn't just been sabotaging my cases randomly, he had been specifically targeting cases that would result in financial losses for me personally. "The Peterson case is perfect," he had written to Victoria. "If I rule against him, he'll have to refund the client's retainer plus pay sanctions. That's at least $50,000 out of his pocket. The more financial pressure we put on him now, the more desperate he'll be to settle the divorce quickly." Victoria's enthusiasm for the plan was evident in her responses. "You're brilliant. He has no idea what's coming." Sometimes I watch him reviewing his cases at the kitchen table, getting more and more frustrated, and I have to leave the room so he doesn't see me smiling. Reading those messages, I felt a cold fury unlike anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't just betrayal, it was calculated psychological torture designed to break me financially and emotionally before delivering the final blow of divorce. But Victoria and Crawford had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated both my intelligence and my determination to fight back. I spent the next 2 months developing a comprehensive strategy. First, I needed to document Crawford's pattern of corruption beyond just my cases. If this was going to federal court, and it was, I needed evidence that he had been taking bribes and making corrupt decisions across multiple cases. Second, I needed to create a situation where Crawford and Victoria would incriminate themselves beyond any reasonable doubt. The text messages Marcus had obtained might not be admissible in court, depending on how they were acquired. I needed them to commit their crimes in a way that could be legally documented. The plan I developed was complex but elegant. I would create a fake case, a lawsuit so obviously meritorious that any honest judge would have to rule in my favor. If Crawford ruled against me despite overwhelming evidence, it would provide incontrovertible proof of corruption. Working with Marcus, I created a fictional client named Robert Thompson, supposedly a small business owner who had been defrauded by a large corporation. We fabricated contracts, financial records, and correspondence that clearly showed fraud. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Crawford's most creative legal reasoning couldn't justify ruling against us. To make the setup perfect, Marcus arranged for Thompson to pay me a substantial retainer, $75,000, that would be deposited in my trust account. If Crawford ruled against me, he would likely order me to return the retainer plus pay sanctions, resulting in a significant personal financial loss. Given the pattern of his previous decisions, this would be irresistible bait. I filed the Thompson case in early August, knowing it would be randomly assigned to one of 3 judges in the district. Through methods I didn't question, Marcus ensured that it landed on Crawford's docket. While waiting for the case to proceed, I continued gathering evidence of Crawford's broader corruption. Marcus had identified at least 12 other cases where Crawford's decisions appeared to be influenced by factors beyond legal merit. In several instances, the winning parties had made substantial donations to Crawford's wife's charitable foundation within weeks of receiving favorable rulings. The pattern was clear. William Crawford was not just corrupt, he was running a sophisticated pay-to-play operation from the bench. The Thompson case hearing was scheduled for September 15th. The night before, Marcus informed me that Victoria and Crawford had met at their usual hotel, and their conversation had been particularly animated. She seemed nervous, Marcus reported. They talked for over 2 hours and she left looking upset. I think she's starting to understand the risks of what they've been doing. But it was too late for second thoughts. The trap was set and all that remained was to spring it. The hearing itself was a masterpiece of judicial corruption. Despite evidence that would have convinced a first-year law student, Crawford systematically excluded every piece of documentation that supported my case. He allowed the defendant's attorney to make objections that had no basis in law, sustained them all, and limited my presentation to less than 30 minutes. His final ruling was so obviously wrong that even the court reporter looked surprised. He not only dismissed the case but ordered me to return Thompson's retainer and pay $25,000 in sanctions for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. This court will not tolerate attorneys who waste judicial resources on baseless claims, Crawford declared from the bench, his voice heavy with theatrical indignation. Mr. Harrison, your recent pattern of poorly prepared cases suggests a decline in professional competence that borders on malpractice. I accepted the ruling with apparent resignation, thanking the court for its time and promising to pay the sanctions within 30 days. But inside I was celebrating. Crawford had just provided the final piece of evidence needed to destroy him. That evening I compiled everything into a comprehensive package. The fabricated case materials, audio recordings of the hearing, Crawford's obviously corrupt ruling, financial records showing the pattern of donations to his wife's charity, and Marcus's surveillance reports documenting the affair with Victoria. But I still needed one more element to make the case perfect. Evidence that Victoria and Crawford were planning to profit personally from their scheme. The opportunity came 2 weeks later. Marcus reported that Victoria and Crawford were planning a weekend getaway to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where they would be staying at a luxury resort under assumed names. This would be the perfect time for them to discuss their future plans without fear of surveillance. Using long-range listening equipment, Marcus recorded their conversations during dinner at the resort's restaurant. The recordings were damning. Once the divorce is final and I have half his assets, we can get married and move to California, Victoria said. I've already started looking at houses in San Diego. With my settlement money and your judicial pension, we can live very comfortably." Crawford's response revealed the full scope of their criminal conspiracy. "The beauty of this plan is that by the time anyone figures out what happened, we'll be gone. I'll announce my retirement from the bench, citing health concerns, and we'll disappear into our new life. Even if someone suspected corruption, they'd never be able to prove it after the fact. What about the other cases? Won't people start asking questions about all the attorneys you ruled against?" "That's the genius of targeting Bruce specifically," Crawford explained. "Everyone will assume he just lost his touch as a lawyer. The other rulings can be explained as tough but fair decisions. Bruce becomes the sacrificial lamb who makes everything else look legitimate." They spent the rest of the weekend planning their new life together, discussing everything from wedding venues to retirement investments. Victoria even showed Crawford real estate listings she had printed from San Diego properties, all priced between $800,000 and $1.2 million. Exactly the range she could afford with half of my assets. I listened to those recordings in Marcus's office, feeling a mixture of rage and satisfaction. They had handed me everything I needed to destroy them both. The final phase of my plan required perfect timing. I needed to coordinate the release of evidence to law enforcement, the media, and the Judicial Ethics Committee simultaneously, while also filing for divorce in a way that would protect my assets and expose Victoria's mental instability. On October 1st, everything went into motion. At 9 a.m., Marcus hand-delivered packages of evidence to the FBI's Chicago field office, the Illinois Attorney General's office, and the State Judicial Ethics Committee. Each package contained audio recordings, surveillance photos, financial records, and a detailed timeline of Crawford's corrupt decisions. At 10 a.m., I sent the same evidence to investigative reporters at the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, and 3 local television stations. I also posted a comprehensive summary on legal ethics forums where it would be seen by attorneys throughout the state. At 11 a.m., I filed for divorce in a different judicial district, far from Crawford's influence. My petition included a request for temporary restraining orders against Victoria, supported by psychiatric evaluations of her text messages and recorded conversations. I argued that her demonstrated capacity for elaborate deception and psychological manipulation posed a threat to my safety and financial security. But the most elegant part of my strategy was yet to come. I had kept the fake Thompson case active throughout this entire period, never paying the court-ordered sanctions. This meant that Crawford's corrupt ruling was still on the books, creating a ticking time bomb that would explode when investigators began reviewing his decisions. At noon on October 1st, I filed a motion requesting that the Thompson case be reviewed by a different judge, citing new evidence of fraud by the defendant. I included all the fabricated evidence that Crawford had excluded, along with expert witness statements confirming the strength of the case. Any honest review would immediately reveal that Crawford's ruling had been inexplicably wrong. The timing was perfect. By the time Crawford realized what was happening, law enforcement agencies, media outlets and judicial oversight committees were already reviewing evidence of his corruption. The scandal broke that evening with a front-page story in the Chicago Tribune. Federal investigation targets Cook County judge for corruption. The article, written by investigative reporter Sarah Chin, no relation to Marcus, detailed Crawford's pattern of suspicious rulings and his inappropriate relationship with the wife of an attorney who appeared frequently before his court. Victoria found out about the investigation the same way as everyone else, by watching the evening news. She was in our living room, folding laundry, when the news anchor's words stopped her cold. "Tonight, federal agents are investigating allegations of corruption against Judge William Crawford, including claims that he systematically ruled against one attorney while conducting an affair with that attorney's wife." I walked into the room just as Victoria's face went pale. She looked at me with the expression of someone who had just realized they were standing at the edge of a cliff. "Bruce," she stammered, "I can explain." "No need," I interrupted, placing a copy of the divorce papers on the coffee table. "I think the explanations are all in those text messages you've been sending to your boyfriend." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and personal vindication. Crawford was arrested on November 15th on charges of bribery, conspiracy, and abuse of office. The FBI had expanded their investigation to include all of his cases over the past 2 years, finding evidence of corruption that extended far beyond his scheme with Victoria. He ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple felonies and was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Victoria's divorce case became a cautionary tale in legal circles. The psychiatric evaluation I had requested revealed evidence of antisocial personality disorder and pathological lying. Her own text messages, in which she expressed pleasure at causing me psychological pain, were used to demonstrate her unfitness for any significant financial settlement. The judge hearing our divorce case, the Honorable Patricia Williams, known for her no-nonsense approach, was particularly harsh in her ruling. Mrs. Harrison's conduct represents a level of marital betrayal that goes beyond simple adultery. Her participation in a criminal conspiracy designed to cause financial and emotional harm to her husband demonstrates a fundamental lack of character that precludes any claim to equitable distribution of assets. Victoria received the minimum settlement required by Illinois law, essentially enough to rent a modest apartment and buy a used car. The house, retirement accounts, and business assets all remained with me. She was also ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees and prohibited from claiming any future earnings from my law practice. But the most satisfying outcome was the reversal of all Crawford's decisions in my cases. A special judicial panel reviewed every ruling he had made while his relationship with Victoria was ongoing, finding clear evidence of bias and corruption. My clients received new trials with different judges, and we won every single case on appeal. The insurance companies and corporations that had benefited from Crawford's corrupt rulings were ordered to pay the original settlements plus interest and legal fees. The Thompson case became a particular point of pride. When Judge Williams reviewed Crawford's dismissal of the obviously meritorious lawsuit, she called it one of the most egregious examples of judicial misconduct in Illinois history. She not only reversed the dismissal but ordered Crawford to personally pay the sanctions he had imposed on me, along with additional penalties for judicial misconduct. The media attention surrounding the case transformed my career in unexpected ways. Legal ethics professors used it as a case study in judicial corruption. I was invited to speak at Bar Association conferences about recognizing and combating corruption in the legal system. My practice expanded beyond anything I had imagined, with clients seeking me out specifically because of my reputation for fighting systemic corruption. 3 years after the scandal broke, I established the Harrison Legal Ethics Institute, a nonprofit organization dedicated to investigating judicial corruption and supporting attorneys who expose unethical behavior. The institute has uncovered corruption in 6 different states and helped dozens of attorneys seek justice when they've been targeted by corrupt judges. Victoria disappeared from Chicago shortly after the divorce was finalized. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved to Phoenix, where she works as a receptionist at a medical clinic. She lives alone in a studio apartment and drives a 10-year-old Honda Civic. The woman who once planned to retire in luxury by stealing my life's work now struggles to pay rent on a salary that's less than I used to spend on her clothing allowance. Crawford, meanwhile, is serving his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Wisconsin. His wife divorced him while he awaited trial, and his pension was revoked due to his criminal conviction. He'll be eligible for parole in 2029, when he'll be 68 years old with no career prospects and no financial resources. Sometimes I wonder if Victoria ever thinks about the life we could have had together. 15 years of marriage, gone because she chose to participate in a criminal conspiracy rather than simply ask for a divorce if she was unhappy. The irony is that if she had been honest about wanting to end our marriage, I would have been generous in the settlement. Instead, her greed and deception cost her everything. But I've learned not to dwell on what might have been. Justice has a way of finding balance even when it takes time. Today, I'm sitting in my expanded law office, reviewing case files for the Harrison Legal Ethics Institute's latest investigation. We're looking into allegations of corruption in the family court system. Another judge who may be trading favorable custody decisions for personal favors. The work is challenging and sometimes dangerous. Corrupt officials don't appreciate being exposed, and I've received my share of threats over the years. But there's something deeply satisfying about using the law to hold lawbreakers accountable, especially when those lawbreakers have betrayed the public trust. My personal life has found its own balance as well. Last year, I married Dr. Amanda Stevens, a forensic psychiatrist who consulted on Victoria's psychological evaluation. Amanda understands the importance of truth and justice in ways that Victoria never did. Our relationship is built on honesty, mutual respect, and shared values, everything my first marriage lacked. As I finish writing this account, I realize that Victoria and Crawford actually did me a favor, though not in the way they intended. Their betrayal forced me to become a better lawyer, a more careful judge of character, and ultimately a happier person. They tried to destroy my life and ended up improving it beyond anything I had imagined possible. The last text message Victoria ever sent to Crawford, intercepted by Marcus during their final hotel meeting, has stayed with me. I think we made a mistake. Bruce is smarter than we gave him credit for. She was right, but it was already too late. In trying to outmaneuver me, they had forgotten the most important rule of legal strategy. Never underestimate your opponent, especially when that opponent has spent 23 years learning how to win cases that everyone else thinks are hopeless. Justice, it turns out, is a dish best served with careful preparation, perfect timing, and overwhelming evidence. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting your enemies destroy themselves while you document everything for the record. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.